Hey folks, this is Jesse Cope, back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well wherever y'all are, whatever it is that y'all are up to today. I have two puppy dogs that are coming out for our walk today. For those of y'all that continue to share the podcast and help it grow, thank you so much. For those of y'all that are new to the podcast, I'm very grateful that y'all have joined. Hope that y'all get something out of it. I will try to make sure I use your time wisely. Whatever it is that you're doing while you're listening, driving to work or lunch or laundry, dishes, going for a walk, whatever it is. Thank y'all. I sure do appreciate it. I don't have much to report. We did get a little rain, which was, I don't remember the last time we got rain, so it was kind of shocking, very nice. Thank you, Lord. I did this last time, folks. I guess I'm going to keep doing it. Thank you, God, for the podcast doing well. So we have garden, winter squash, pumpkins that seem to be doing pretty well right now despite the heat. Sadly, however, with the rain, the grass is now doing as well as they are. And if I don't get back in the garden, we're going to be growing a wonderful crop of grass and not a very wonderful crop of squash and pumpkins. But my schedule has just been crazy busy, as I know y'all all understand. We're going to get going. This is a subject that I have been, looking forward to and kind of dreading for months on end. And I have told a couple of y'all that we've talked that this was coming. And we're going to do a series that I feel like I've tried to prepare for, but I also feel pretty inadequate to, because I think it's such a huge deal and so often overlooked today. So forgive me if I do a poor job at this, folks. I'll try and get the salient points across and hopefully won't mess it up so bad that you can't get those. And in lieu of that, though, because I have some doubts about how well I'm going to be able to get this across, I'm going to go ahead and kind of tell you the main points like an abstract in a scientific paper, and then I'm going to come back to it. So we're going to spend about the next 4 to 5 days talking about 1930s Britain and Germany, particularly in relationship to Churchill and some of the things that he saw, because he really was alone. Almost all of this I'm going to pull out of a book titled Alone, which is the second in a series of a trilogy that's a biography written by a man named Manchester. Phenomenal biography, by the way. And the deal is there's a lot of little points in here, but the biggest overall point, folks, is so often today we get, and you see it, a lot of y'all that I talk to occasionally online or in person, we always fall into this trap of focusing on national cultural leaders and political leaders. Whether you're talking about Disney or Coca-Cola or whatever it is, some auto manufacturer, Starbucks, or we talk about Biden or Pelosi or Trump or Schumer or AOC, or you pick whoever. And the deal is, folks, that these are all just a reflection of us. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare, which I think is just shockingly, and I have for quite a while, folks, blatant, the comparison between 1930s British citizens and a large majority of the conservative Christian population in America and 1930s German citizens and the everyday American left voter. And I think it'll be pretty clear as we go through these next few days, but we'll see what y'all think. Y'all give me pretty good feedback. So I'm sure if this is a train wreck, I'll know that too. All right, so here we go. So this is a lot of these things, and I'm going to kind of jump around, but right now we're really dealing with the mid 1930s. Churchill has really been alone in his outcry against Hitler in particular. He was really focused. He knew what was coming, in the sense that he knew something bad was coming if Hitler wasn't checked. You know, he of course didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I'm not saying that. He's not God. He's not premonition or whatever it is. But at this point in the mid 1930s, and he had really been kicked out of his party, and that's one comment you're going to see in just a minute. The party politics, in fact, I'll go ahead and talk about that. I'll get back to it. But the party politics, folks, it doesn't matter, and this is true today. It doesn't matter Republican or Democrat. That's not the important thing. The important thing is, what are the values? What are we voting for? And yeah, you can definitely make some large group stereotypes based on party platform, but the thing that we have to focus on is values and character and morals and what's really going on. You know, Washington warned us about this party stuff, and he knew it was a bad idea, and it's turned out to be a horrible idea, because so often we choose to vote for so-and-so based on the letter behind their name and know nothing about them. And that's, man, it's ripped us apart. So Spanish Civil War's going on, mid-30s, and Churchill just got passed over for a position in the cabinet that the whole nation knew he was eminently qualified for. Chamberlain, I think it was Chamberlain, I can't remember the PM at this point, Prime Minister at this point, didn't want him and picked somebody that was supremely unqualified. And so one comment about the fight in Spain from Churchill between the communists and the people that claimed to be Republican, the loyalists, right? Naturally, he later wrote, I was not in favor of the communists. How could I be? When if I had been a Spaniard, they would have murdered me and my friends. Folks, this is so important to remember. When people in America today espouse socialism or communism, we've got to look back at the last century and realize every single time, without exception, without fail, there's not one single exception, socialism and communism leads to slaughter of millions when it's fully developed. Millions. They're horrible ideologies, absolutely evil values across the board. Another comment, this is from August 10th, 1936 in the Evening Standard. Churchill wrote that the constitutional and would-be republic had found itself sliding steadily toward the left, falling into the grip of dark, violent forces, coming ever more plainly into the open, and operating by murder, pillage, and industrial disturbance. The left continually, folks, when you're talking about this, falls more and more and more into this darkness. And you can see it in the BLM, Antifa mobs. You can see it in the LGBTQ stuff that is just messing with our children so bad. You can see it in the revisionist history, the critical race theory, the identity politics, the bigotry, the racism, the sexism when they're pretending that they're not sexist, that's pushed through feminism. All of this stuff slides farther and farther into this dark, violent grip that Churchill was talking about here. And I'm kind of checking through. I think that's about it on that page. So, since the German threat, this is out of the Manchester biography, since the German threat had absolute priority, Churchill told the House, Britain should refuse to take sides in Spain. Though I will not pretend that if I had to choose between communism and Nazism, I would choose communism. He added, I hope I will not be called upon to survive in a world under a government of either of these dispensations. I feel unbounded sorrow and sympathy for their victims. This goes back to the Ayn Rand comment. You know, socialism, communism, Nazism, fascism, modern American leftism, they're all just different shades of the same evil, folks. They're all just getting to the same evil, tyrannical, dictatorial, horrible end state in different ways. You can look at Cuba, you can look at Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia, you can look at Communist China, Maoist China, you can look at North Korea, you can look at Venezuela. There's just everywhere. There's example after example, folks. Socialism to communism to tyranny, murder, and death. Pol Pot, the list just goes on and on. And Churchill here, if he has to pick one, but he's saying both are horrible. And we need to remember that today. When people start to say, oh, I'm for socialism, Chavez or whoever, or I'm communist, or leftist, folks, it's all the same. There's nothing American about any of those. Churchill wrote for the Evening Standard a lot. This is still 1936, and he's talking about the nations that would be that were under the shadow of the swastika of the Nazis. Such civilization as we have been able to achieve would be reduced by renewed warfare to pulp and squalor. The peoples of Europe chattering, busy, sporting, toiling, amused from day to day by headlines and from night to night by cinemas, were nevertheless slipping, sinking, rolling backward to the age when the earth was void and darkness moved upon the face of the waters. A lot of y'all will recognize that Bible verse reference that Churchill put in there going back to Genesis. And he's saying, while we're out partying and having this good time, and there's another quote, I'm going to try and get there today, that talks about, priorities. And we hammer that on this podcast, folks. Priorities, priorities, priorities. We have become a nation that wants to be entertained. We want to be, there's that great line, and I'm going to use this again later this week, but, are you not entertained from that movie Gladiator? We spend hours watching movies, TV, on our phones, social media, sporting events constantly. Reading books for not for gaining knowledge, but for entertainment. We do all this stuff. We don't focus on God. We don't spend near that much time in prayer or our Bible. We don't spend that much time on our spouse, loving them really with actions, raising, teaching our kids. We farm our kids out now as early as 6 weeks. Farm them out to somebody else to raise. And then we can't imagine why our country's falling apart. I mean, it's just insanity. And Churchill's talking about it right here. We're going out and being entertained at these movies, and we're going backwards into this point when the earth was void and darkness moved upon the face of the waters. And that's not a good point, folks. It's not a good point. I'm kind of having to go from page to page here, folks, and making sure that I'm picking up the points that I wanted to. Okay, so one of the problems in the 30s was Churchill was trying to push for Britain to get on a war footing, a rearmament footing, and he was alone, like the title of this biography, this second volume says. And he was really ostracized for it. Nobody wanted to listen to him. When you're that person that keeps trying to warn people around you about something coming, and they don't want to talk about that because that's uncomfortable, which is really what we've been doing in America for quite some time. And that was Churchill. And one of the comments he made is that, if we have to, we need to force our manufacturing to start to get ready for this because it's coming. We see it coming. Germany is arming rapidly. And so the comparison, folks, I forgot to try and throw this in, but when you talk about the left, they may not be literally arming right now, but they've been weaponizing education and our institutions for years. You talk about Boy Scouts of America, you talk about public education. Look at what happened to the president recently, having his home raided. There's never been a president that the FBI raided their home, as far as I know, in modern history. And I talked to a couple of history teachers about that. I should say a couple teachers, one history teacher. But the point is, just because we don't see all these factories running at high capacity, like we did with the Germans, doesn't mean that the left isn't pushing the same direction. They absolutely are. If you can't pray and talk about the Bible and teach from the Bible in public education without fear of losing your job, when this is a Christian nation, that's weaponizing that industry. If you can't take the Boy Scouts of America, which was a private institute, and have requirements about not putting girls in there, or transgender, or lesbians and homosexuals, then that's weaponizing that, because if you do that, then they say, oh well, we can come for you. It's 87,000 IRS agents recently, right? Why? Why? We don't have that on the border where we're being flooded with illegal immigrants. Why do you need all that? There's a darkness coming, folks, and well, we'll just keep going. One of the comments that Hitler completely continued to pass around, and this is a quote from the book here, just from the author. Germany had no designs on Western Europe, he told them, because the West would be a difficult program for her. This was Baldwin, I believe, who I think was maybe the PM at this point. I don't know. I've got to go back. I should have done a better job with that. But the point was, Hitler continually, I don't want anything to do with Western Europe. I'm just going east. Well, that was a lie. That was a lie. And how often do we hear, one of the things that I really wanted to bring up, and I forgot to gather that quote today, was every time Hitler got quiet for a little bit, the British citizens said, oh man, we're done finally, because they were so terrified of war. And you can understand that. That was justifiable. They had lost so many of their sons in World War I, and they were so scarred by that you can understand that. But every time Hitler quieted down after taking the Rhineland, or then after taking part of Czechoslovakia, or Austria before that, everybody goes, oh, okay, all right, we're good. But you weren't. They were just quieting down for a little bit. He was just quieting down for a little bit. And look what happens with the left every time, folks. Every time they get a little quiet and we take a breath on the conservative Christian side and say, okay, man, we stopped him. We're not going to go any farther. But we do every time. And there's an analogy. That comes from my uncle, transparent here, but he's a man that I have a lot of respect for. I think he's very wise in a lot of ways, and he made the comment to me once, months ago, said, the pendulum is swinging back to the right, which you hear so often today on the conservative Christian side. And he said it is, but every time for the last several decades when it's swung back to the right, it's been a little bit farther to the left, so that eventually when it swings all the way back to the right, it's going to be where the far left was decades ago. And that's what the British citizens, they didn't want to pay attention. They wanted to be entertained. We want to be entertained on the Christian conservative right. We have for decades, folks, whether we want to admit it or not, whether you want to admit it, whether I want to admit it. We want to spend hours watching TV, reading books for entertainment, being on our phone, even listening to podcasts to a certain extent. I don't want to shoot myself in the foot here, but even doing that to a certain extent. Watching sports for hours, even if it's our kids, folks, for hours and hours. But we don't want to worry about these real issues. That's how the British citizens in the 1930s were. And every time Hitler quieted down, they took a deep breath and thought, okay, we're good now. And every time we've managed to check, there's this huge intake of breath with the Roe v. Wade decision earlier this year. And it was a major battle, folks, but it was just a battle. It wasn't the war. It wasn't even close to the war. And that's defending our most sacred, first listed inalienable right that Thomas Jefferson listed in the Declaration from God. And we're like, oh, man, all right, we did it. We're good. Everything's okay now. No, there's still babies, innocent, defenseless babies in the United States of America being slaughtered every day. Great victory, great battle, but not the war. And so those comparisons there, right, between the left and the right again. In the Evening Standard, Winston expressed astonishment that Parliament and the British people should ignore this boast and its implications. So this was the boast earlier. I should have read up here. Someone had to sound the alarm bell after Göring, one of the Nazi, members of state or generals or something, contemptuous of the Allies' pusillanimity, if you can pronounce that, basically indifference, announced that between 4 million and 5 million active, intelligent, valiant Germans were working night and day in the munitions factories of the Ruhr to arm the expanding German army. And then Churchill said in the Evening Standard, he expressed astonishment that Parliament and the British people should ignore this boast and its implications. The Reich he wrote, is arming more strenuously, more scientifically, and upon a larger scale than any nation has ever armed before. Surely these are facts which ought to bulk as large in ordinary peaceful people's minds as horse racing, a prize fight, or 19/20ths of the current newspaper bill of fare. What he's saying here, and there's another line that I thought was great. This is from the author, just him saying later Churchill would be remembered as a great war leader, but no man ever fought harder for peace. If I haven't said it before here, folks, and I don't want war. Nobody that has a brain wants war. And especially nobody in the military that's been over there. I've never talked to somebody that's been there that wants war. But Churchill, so he kept saying, rearm, rearm, rearm. We've got to get ready, But he was trying to avoid the war. And here he was saying, so we're going to spend all this time on horse racing, on watching boxing matches, and on reading the newspaper. But we're not going to spend any of this time on these facts coming out of Germany about how fast they're arming, how much they're arming, more than any other nation in the history of the world, they said. And that's what we're doing, folks. We go to sporting events. We watch Amazon and Hulu and Netflix and we read for entertainment. And we do all this other stuff, and we don't spend any time with God, and we don't spend any time on our marriages, and we don't open our eyes to what's going on right here in America with the left. We're being just as blind as the 1930s British on the conservative Christian side in America. And the left is being just as willful going down the road that Hitler took the 1930s everyday citizens down. And we've got to make that acknowledgement, folks. And I'm going to try and take us through that over the next few days. Every day I'm going to try and end with this, and I know I'm over, folks, and I'm so sorry, but this is a huge topic. I hope y'all stick with me for the next few days, and I hope that y'all will share it with other people, because I don't think we're talking about this particular aspect enough. Really, God first and foremost, and then the fact that it's us, the citizens, that we ought to be concerned with on the left, and that on the right we've got to wake up. But this is from Abraham Lincoln. This is part of his Lyceum address from 1838. I've read this for those of y'all that have been here for a while, a number of times. For those of you that haven't, I think he's talking about how can America fail? How then shall we perform it? At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? By what means shall we fortify against it? Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step over the ocean to crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined, with all the treasure of the earth, our own excepted, in their military chest, with a Bonaparte for a commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. We need to wake up, folks. I'll leave y'all alone for today. We're going to talk more about this a lot more over the next few days. Sure do appreciate y'all joining me. Thank you for going on this little walk. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless America. We'll talk to y'all again real soon. Looking forward to it.